Disco Elysium is a difficult game to describe to others. While I could use a description, it's an isometric detective RPG where choices matter, that wouldn't get to the true marrow of the game's bones. I could call it a nuanced take on politics, or a game dripping with rich dialogue, and none of these descriptors would be wrong. But they wouldn't be quite right. At its core, Disco Elysium is a game about falling apart. Disco Elysium is scrounging around the floor trying to scoop up each shard of yourself, and being forced to put yourself back together without instructions. The game begins with the deep, warm, primordial blackness. Reluctantly, a consciousness surfaces from the void. Tell me, what's waiting for me? An answer. There's a giant ball there, and evil apes. And the evil apes are duking it out on the ball. You're one of them. The consciousness seeks understanding. And what is this duking it out I keep hearing about? The void rumbles. Vying for resources? The part of the presentation you want to take home is this. You have to beat the other evil apes in the face, or you lose. The consciousness settles deeper into the warm purgatory. That's sad. Yes, it is. You drowned in that sadness a long time ago. The consciousness resurfaces. What do you mean, drowned? You lost. Disco Elysium starts where most tragedies end. Sprawled on the floor, soaked in vomit, and reeking of alcohol. The protagonist wakes up naked, with no memory of who he is or why he's here. All he knows is that his head hurts. The player meets a protagonist at his lowest point, in the midst of a massive hangover. A hangover so bad that he lost all memory of not only the night before, but the years before. The man cannot even remember his name. When he tries to remember, to reach back into the recesses of his brain for some semblance of identity, all he retrieves is hazy sadness and an enslaving sense of loss. Throughout the game, the player walks with the man as he gradually discovers who he is, purely through the testimonies of those around him. The player remains at his side when his memories are too much to bear and he lashes out at undeserving bystanders. The player must live with the protagonist in the same way the man must live with himself. And comfortably. And with great patience. For the protagonist, whom we discover is named Harry, living with himself is not easy. Disco Elysium illustrates his internal struggle through the use of skills. While some skills, like reaction speed, determine whether you can catch an object in midair, most of the skills are more mental. Skills like empathy weigh your ability to detect a character's true motivation underneath their emotional front. Visual calculus signifies your ability to reconstruct crime scenes purely by their evidence. Despite their theoretical nature, these skills are not passive. They do not merely rest in the background until the player attempts a highly specific action. No, these skills live with Harry, inside of his thoughts. During conversations, skills fight to be heard, suggesting that Harry should do this or say that. They exist in the same mental space as the rest of Harry's thoughts, and frequently interrupt the conversation to make their opinions known. As someone who struggles with intrusive thoughts, this mechanic hits very close to home. It often feels like my intrusive thoughts claw their way to the forefront of my mind, with no regard for my true beliefs. They shout over my reasonable thoughts, provoking a sense of fear that causes me to try to silence them as quickly as possible. However, fighting my thoughts only gives them more strength in the long run. In Disco Elysium, there is no way to opt out of the skills interjecting their thoughts into conversations. Like the rest of Harry's struggles, they must be lived with. When skills inevitably share their suggestions, however, the player is given a choice. They can choose either to consider the suggestion, or they can let the thought pass. They are not forced to comply with the skill's idea, but they do not have to fight it. This stance on intrusive thoughts shocked me when I first encountered it. It didn't quite make sense to me, but it was undeniably intriguing. Was it really possible to acknowledge my thoughts without obeying them? It was a dangerous idea, but a chance I was willing to take for a better quality of life. While others might have shrugged off this mechanic as just one of the game's features, the underlying philosophy stuck with me in my everyday life. My thoughts don't have the power to cause an internal war, unless I give them that power through fear. Just like how I am not obligated to follow the advice of every person I meet, I am in no way obligated to obey every thought that passes through my brain. This realization freed me. It gave me a method of coping with my daily struggles, one that restored my sense of agency. Harry recognizes his freedom in Disco Elysium as well. Harry's personality isn't determined by all the thoughts he has. It's determined by the thoughts he says yes to. After leveling up, the player is given one skill point to invest into a skill of their choice. Upgrading a skill not only gives Harry more literal prowess in that field, it also makes the skill more vocal in conversations. Just like in real life, you feed the creatures you want to come back. If you want to become an ambassador of psychology that reads people's true intentions, you may invest in the skills empathy and composure. If you want to become a fear-mongering authority figure with impulsivity issues, you should invest points into the half-light and electrochemistry skills. These skills determine who Harry becomes, shaping his internal monologue through the choices of the player. They nudge him toward filtering his thoughts and encouraging the voices that are helpful, making his thoughts a little easier to live with each day. The skills quiet his self-hatred, whispering, "Even if you're not who you want to be yet, there is always tomorrow." A while back, I experienced a moment that made Disco Elysium painfully human, and by complete accident. Minor spoilers for one of the game's cases, so please skip ahead to 12:17 if you would like to avoid all spoilers. Everyone gone? Okay. Early in the game, Harry meets a woman idling in front of a bookstore, curious about her husband's whereabouts. In West Revachol, there's a boardwalk that juts out from the coast, and on that boardwalk, a man. What was once a man. Now, all that remains is a pile of liquor bottles, a collapse in the boardwalk's planks, a lost man, and the unfortunate marriage of all three. Harry and his detective partner Kim discover that the deceased man on the boardwalk was a woman's missing husband, and as men of the police force, they must show up at her door and break the news. After opening her door to the two men, the woman is both anxious and confused. She tells the men about her daughter and her husband, frantically oblivious to the situation. Kim prompts Harry to inform the woman of her husband's fate. At this moment, there's an empathy check to determine whether Harry succeeds in breaking the news. It's relatively easy to pass. There's about a 72% chance to succeed. I proceed to fail the check. Harry's words slip back into his throat, no sense of responsibility or police duty able to rupture the silence. He freezes. Kim notices Harry's predicament and takes over, informing the woman of her husband's passing with professionalism and emotional distance. The job is complete. After easing the apartment's doors closed, and feeling the crisp air of Revachol's streets, Kim approaches Harry. So, the death notification. Harry apologizes, face to face with the depth of his failure. Kim responds with unprecedented softness. "It's alright. Don't worry about it. And, officer, I've seen worse. This wasn't the worst I've seen, okay? Now, let's go. This scene broke me. Even now, months after playing this section, the empathy in this conversation serves as a model for helping those who are hurting. This scene is so full of pain and unexpected grief that it gnaws past both Harry and Kim's professional exteriors, stripping away their job expectations and task lists, and for just a moment, revealing who they really are. Humans. Living, breathing humans that hurt. Harry and Kim must endure the pain of witnessing the worst day of this woman's life, and learn how to live with that weight. At its core, that's what coping is. Learning to live with the weight. This conversation illustrates the proper way to help a friend cope. And it's not showering them with aggressive optimism, assuring them that it's going to get better. Because when the water is already up to your hairline, it doesn't help when people tell you how to breathe. Kim Kitsuragi doesn't tell Harry that he knows how he feels, or that if he just had more determination, he could have delivered the notification. No. Kim doesn't do that. Kim sees Harry at the bottom of a pool of paralyzing pain and regret, and slips into the water. And he sits. And waits. Waits until Harry is ready to muster up enough strength in his aching body to swim to the surface. When Harry's ready, Kim pulls him out of the thick sadness that seeks to devour him whole. Kim is not willing to let Harry drown. There is something so healing about a friend who hurts with you, who will sit in the pain and cry with you. Some weights are just too heavy to be carried alone. As I was continuing to play Disco Elysium, investing skill points into helpful thoughts and making choices I thought befitting of a detective, I started to realize something. Harry is becoming someone. He is growing into a person whose identity is not dependent on his trauma. He isn't wholly concerned with his past memories and who he used to be. Although Harry still looks backwards and searches for answers about his past self, he looks forward as well. As Harry's character develops through the game, his detective partner Kim can't help but notice. Kim admits that while Harry employs rather odd methods to solve cases, he is skilled at his job. He starts to play along with Harry's antics, creating a sense of camaraderie and almost fun. The two share genuine moments to make Kim feel less like a reluctant legal guardian and more like a friend. This progression was so hopeful to watch. Harry no longer rooted his identity in his painful situation. No, he decided who he wanted to be despite his suffering. Harry didn't just want to be a cop. He wanted to buy ugly glasses. He wanted to paint murals on walls. He wanted to dance. The most freeing stage of coping is when you remember who you are, not just who you had to be to survive. After an injury that affects your daily functioning or a bad breakup, it can be difficult to remember who you were before the incident. Sometimes you never fully return to your previous identity. Harry isn't able to go back and retrieve his past self. Instead, he becomes a stronger version of himself by enduring the present. This new self, this new Harry, is able to carry the weight of his struggles. This new Harry can take on tomorrow. His presence isn't just something to be tolerated, it's meant to be enjoyed. Disco Elysium is very close to my heart. It's one of the only games I've played that has changed my perspective on life, giving me a healthy way to think about my thoughts. It has a story that leans into the topics of pain and grief and doesn't pretend to have an easy fix. The game begins with Harry in the depths of self-hatred and regret and depicts his tooth and nail climb to healing. Disco Elysium illustrates how sorrow and addiction are heavy burdens, but the game also shows how to carry them. As I progressed through this game, I realized that it wasn't about Harry. All this time, I had helped Harry filter through his thoughts and identify which ones were beneficial. I encouraged him to tell Kim about his struggles, rather than shouldering the weight alone. I invited Harry to find himself outside of his trauma and accept the stronger person he was becoming. Little did I know, I was speaking to myself the entire time. The game taught me how to cope with the pain in a very intimate way, firsthand. Disco Elysium taught me that even on the days when my thoughts spiral and I'm not sure if I even like who I am, there is always tomorrow. Although Harry had no instructions, and the shards drew blood from his hands, against all odds, he pieced himself together into something beautiful. Maybe I could too.